All right, it's Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet with Captain Ron, and we have a great show for you today. We have another Contact in the Desert presenter, and we are going, and in fact, he's a return guest multiple times. Actually, I think this is like his third or fourth time. But we have Dr. Michael Salla, who is a pioneer in the development of exopolitics. He is an author of several books and is also the founder of the Exopolitics Institute, a nonprofit organization that analyzes the political implications of extraterrestrial presence. And Captain Ron is an example of that. Most recently, he is the author of Antarctica's Hidden History, which is the third book of his secret space program series. So please welcome to back to Truth Be Told, Dr. Michael Salla. How you doing, sir?
Hello, introduction, Tony.
Well, welcome. We love having you on the show, and it's like I said, you've been on multiple times, and every single time we learn something new. I know, Captain Ron. Let's go. You have a couple questions to start.
Well, yeah, I thought we'd start off. We like to jump right in here because we have such limited time on this show. Let's start off and talk about Antarctica, and maybe we start with a little bit. I know you know the history and everything about Antarctica. Why don't we start with like the German presence down there and what's going on with that, and then we'll move into what's going on right now down in Antarctica, because that seems to be the biggest thing that's been happening in our community lately. Right. Is the Antarctica discoveries.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it definitely is in the news. I mean, the thing is that, I mean, there's a lot of kind of history, backstory to the whole German presence in Antarctica, starting from 1947, the Operation High Jump expedition, and the rumors that the Germans had established underground bases in Antarctica using these underground waterway entry points into the Antarctic continent, and where they established these bases in these underground caverns. Now, you know, that's been a subject of rumor for many years. There have been a lot of whistleblowers that have talked about what the Germans did down there. I've worked with a number of these whistleblowers. Some of them have come up with a really kind of interesting history of how the Germans did it. One whistleblower in particular, William Tompkins, says that he was part of this Navy espionage program during the Second World War, where the Navy actually tracked the Germans as they escaped down to Antarctica, and that's why Operation High Jump happened soon after the war.
Hey, Doc, now, isn't there a lot of current whistleblowers that are echoing some of the thoughts that William Tompkins said back in the day?
Well, that's right. Some of them actually, like Corey Good, he says he was part of a secret space program. He says he had access to briefing documents that were part of this secret space program that were on these transparent glass pads. He called them smart pads. And when he heard William Tompkins' testimony, he realized that the information that Tompkins was talking about and the briefings he was a part of way back in the Second World War had been uploaded into these briefing packets that he was reading like 40 years later. And he also talked about the Germans being in Antarctica and had established this secret space program down there, and that they were operating craft that were going to the moon, going to Mars, and even into deep space. So this was something that Corey Good corroborated after listening to William Tompkins, and that was kind of matched with what Corey Good was saying. But you know, there have been other whistleblowers that have talked about it as well. Most recently, actually, just the last couple of months, Linda Moulton Howe has been talking about these two Navy whistleblowers, Spartan 1 and Spartan 2, who say that they know about the program down in Antarctica, and actually one of them went down to Antarctica to basically perform a mission to one of these underground bases or a facility down there in Antarctica.
I know at the end of the war, we found out that the Nazis had looked into, you know, UFOs, and also we even went down to Antarctica. Their technology started at the end to become pretty enhanced to compare to what we had at the time. Did they find any technology down in Antarctica that we know of that the Nazis had down there that was way more advanced than we thought? that they just maybe haven't disclosed, or whistleblower?
Yeah, well, the Germans actually developed a lot of really advanced technology in Germany itself.
Right.
But they had also help from different extraterrestrial groups. So they had help in developing their flying saucer technologies. They actually had help in finding places in Antarctica where they could set up their bases.
Wait, you're saying you think the ETs were working with the Germans?
Yes.
Wow.
Throughout the Second World War, that this is going to be one of the big things that emerges. That you look at all human conflict going back centuries. Different ET groups have used humans as proxies. There's a book, a really good book by William Bramley called The Gods of Eden, and he describes this historically, how this has occurred. And during the Second World War, it was the same thing. You had different extraterrestrial groups, one helping the Axis powers and another group helping the Allied powers. So the Germans had help in developing their technologies from extraterrestrials, and they were given assistance in finding places or refuges in Antarctica where they could go and basically escape the catastrophe of the Second World War in the way it ended.
Hey, Doctor, where are you seeing that information? Where are you getting it? Just from this whistleblower people that are saying that the ETs were working with the Germans, or did you find that somewhere else?
I found that also from different German scientists. One of the most famous is Hermann Oberth, the father of the German rocket program, and he was asked a question point blank. How did Germany develop these really advanced technologies? And he said that we had help from extraterrestrial civilizations.
Well, that's pretty. And if that's the guy that's saying that's something. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and Werner von Braun had said something very, very similar as well. There have been a number of other whistleblowers. One that comes to mind is a former CIA agent. I think it was Virgil Armstrong, and he said the same thing, that the Germans had help from extraterrestrials. So there's quite a number of whistleblowers and scientists that say that the Germans had this kind of help. And of course, they survived the Second World War in their underground facilities in Antarctica, as well as their secret facilities in South America, that provided logistical support, financial support for everything the Germans were doing.
So why do you think the tables turned if the UFOs were helping the Nazi party or Nazi?
The
Germany?
ETs were helping.
Yeah,
Germany.
the ETs were helping the Nazis. Why do you think they quote lost the war? How did the tables turn? Did they have a falling out, or did the U.S. get their own version of the UFO or aliens to help them? Or
well, there's a couple of reasons. One is the technology was so advanced that it would take a lot of time to successfully weaponize it for the war effort. And the Germans had access to the technology, and they tried to weaponize it. And there's a lot of kind of documents that have been leaked showing how the Nazi SS had developed these tank killers, like the Hannibal 1 and the Hannibal 2, were effectively tank killers, and they came into operation by the end of the Second World War. But it was really too late. Just the Allied powers focused all their efforts not into developing these advanced technologies. They put their efforts into developing workable technologies. And in fact, there's some documents that are part of the Majestic documents that show that President Roosevelt made the decision not to try to reverse engineer these technologies for the Second World War because they were too advanced, and decided that it was better to just develop the conventional weapons, including the atomic bomb, because the scientific principles were well understood and they could be applied. Whereas the Germans gambled, Hitler gambled, and the gamble failed. But nevertheless, they did get help in escaping the collapse of Nazi Germany. That is the German hierarchy, those that were able to relocate to Antarctica and South America in time to basically live to fight another day.
Do you think Hitler himself went there too?
Yeah, definitely. There's in fact, these have been the stories that have been circulating for years, and just just the last few years, the CIA has declassified a number of documents, and as part of the declassification of documents that were held up under the embargo on anything to do with President Kennedy's assassination, that included amongst the batch of documents were some CIA documents that showed that Adolf Hitler was alive and in Colombia as late as the early 1960s. So you have to ask yourself, well, why would CIA documents describing reports of Hitler being president in South America and in countries like Colombia and Argentina, why were they held up under the Kennedy assassination files? So, right there, you have to ask, is there a connection between the Germans in Antarctica and Kennedy's assassination?
It's fascinating that this German guy says that he was working directly with ETs. Isn't it true? Wasn't there Admiral Byrd? Didn't he have some sort of contact with an underground race down there, the Ariani people or something?
Well, that's right, yes. I mean, this is part of Admiral Byrd's diaries. And people, they're all over the place in terms of whether these are authentic or not. I think that they're probably, I think that they're based on authentic events. Whether or not Admiral Byrd actually wrote it, we're not sure. But in the diaries, he talks about the time when he was missing, which actually did happen. There was an incident during Operation High Jump where he flew with some other Navy pilots on a reconnaissance mission deep into the Antarctic interior towards the South Pole. And he actually did go missing for a few hours, and they almost had given up on him, thought that his plane had crashed or something. But in the diaries, he describes actually going into this underground civilization where he met this inner Earth civilization that basically spoke a Germanic accent, had a lot of information that they had to share about the dangers of atomic weapons, and really advising the United States not to go down the track in terms of developing atomic weapons, that this would bring about disaster. And if the United States and other major countries decided to abolish their nuclear weapons and cooperate with the inner Earth civilizations, they would be given access to technologies that we could only dream of.
One could speculate, if you wanted to, that the whole ET phenomenon could be coming from this advanced race that lives there, not from another star system, but just there. They're advanced. They've been hidden. We never saw them. And those are the spaceships we're seeing. And they just go back to the inner Earth.
Well, actually, this is one of the things that Corey Goode was told, that these inner Earth civilizations actually pretend to be extraterrestrials because they don't want surface humanity to learn about who they really are and where they're located, because our weapons are becoming so advanced that if our governments knew just how many civilizations existed underground, they would begin looking at developing kind of like these weapon systems that could be used for targeting inner Earth locations. So some of the contactees, and in fact, some of the early contactees, for a good example is, I think it was Schmidt, Ron Schmidt, I think his name was. He was a contactee in the 1950s. He says he was picked up by this group of extraterrestrials that were speaking High German. So you have to ask yourself right there, well, why would extraterrestrials be speaking High German? And he wasn't alone. There were others saying the same thing.
This is way out there, but you could see how that kind of makes sense, that if there were this advanced race, that they could do that. We would think, well, they must be coming from across the galaxy, but maybe they're right there. It's very hard to access Antarctica to find out these answers. But isn't that what's going on now? We keep hearing that these dignitaries are going down there. Newt Gingrich went down there. Obama supposedly went down there. Royalty, all the what's that? The bishop of in Russia, the high that religious guy from Russia went down there. A lot of high-profile people supposedly are going to Antarctica because of some recent discoveries. What are you hearing that's under the ice down there that's causing such a stir?
Well, one of the things that did happen soon after President Trump came into office was that he sent Newt Gingrich down there. this was in early 2017, and this followed only a few months after you had the Secretary of State, John Kerry, going down there.
Right.
Just as the elections were being fought or being decided, he went down there, and I think he went down there to basically explain to the Antarctic Germans why it was that their candidate was going to lose the election. And I think Trump sent Gingrich down there to basically open up feelers for negotiations with the Germans, because that's what Trump does. That's his big, it's his trump card, really, is that he believes he's a good negotiator. So he wants to make a deal with the Germans and the deep state that are based down there in Antarctica. And later on in 2017, he sends Rex Tillerson down there to South America, down to Patagonia. And Rex Tillerson is down there along with Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. And Bezos is working with the Chinese space program down in Argentina, in Patagonia. And basically, this is when an agreement was reached between the Trump administration and the German Antarctic program in terms of how they would move forward in rolling out the existence of this German space program in Antarctica, and basically kind of rebrand them as a kind of more ethical kind of German group that are willing to share these really advanced technologies with the rest of humanity.
It does kind of seem weird. It's not my first place on a place to visit. We had Brad Olson on not too long ago, and he went down there, and he was like
looking for this.
He goes, I didn't see any evidence or even talk to anybody that seemed interested in or even heard of anything about it. But he said there is a big presence of military when it comes to places you can't go, which does kind of like, why would you in this place where you can't grow anything? It's hard to even dig into the ice, quote, quote. But why would the military have a big presence down there and have areas where you can't go to? So it makes you think
there's some smoke there.
Yeah, there's smoke there. There's like all these people going down there, and why do they even care? So,
well, I think one of the big attractions of Antarctica was that it is obviously it's a frozen continent,
right,
and the conditions are really harsh. But the thing is, if you can master the conditions in Antarctica, then you have the expertise to be able to establish bases on the Moon, bases on Mars, bases on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and on the asteroid belt. So it makes sense. If you want to establish a secret space program, the place you want to go to kind of like train and to develop the technologies is Antarctica.
Did he lock up?
No, he's still there.
So it's Antarctica, and so you have these underground bases. You have these frozen lakes under like 2 miles of ice, like Vostok, for example. So these are all really good staging grounds or places where you could actually develop the technologies to do something similar on these other off-planet locations in terms of developing bases and eventually utilizing the resources there. So the Germans in Antarctica are really the world leaders in developing off-planet locations.
You know what we've been talking about on this show too is that with the warming and the ice melting and everything changing, perhaps this would force public disclosure of alien life. If they uncover some ship that's a mile long or any of these, a base or anything, they can't hide that completely forever.
Well, that's right, because West Antarctica is actually melting very, very quickly. Not so much because of global warming and the warming of the oceans of the world, but because of all of these buried volcanoes that are becoming active. And it's just in 2017, the team of University of Edinburgh scientists were able to discover 91 additional volcanoes all under the ice. Previously, they found 40 of them, and these were the ones that protruded above the ice cap. But they found 91 more under the ice cap, making West Antarctica the world's most active volcanic region.
Isn't that fascinating? I would guess that last on my list, right, Tony?
Right.
That the most active volcanoes on the planet are in Antarctica? That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's why West Antarctica is melting much, much more quickly than many scientists can even dream about. So, many scientists say that by the end of this century, you'll have the Ross Ice Shelf melting and other parts of West Antarctica melting. Well, because of these volcanoes, you could actually have all that happening within the next 10 years.
Wow.
And once the ice sheets in West Antarctica melt, because they're not as thick as the ice sheets in Eastern Antarctica. Western Antarctica, the ice sheets are much smaller. So as they melt, everything that's buried there under the ice becomes exposed. So yeah, there is a time because if all this happens over the next 10 years, that West Antarctica melts and everything under the ice gets exposed, then they can't hide the fact that there was an ancient civilization buried there under the Antarctic ice sheets.
So do you think it's an alien thing, or do you think it's an ancient civilization here when before the ice age, that it was just a civilization like Göbekli Tepe or something that's just happened to develop down there when it was sunny?
Both. Because, and this is one of the really important things about our history that we have to understand, that Atlantis, the last recorded reference to Atlantis was 9600 BC, which corresponds with the end of the last ice age. And of course, Plato talked about Atlantis in his dialogues, and there have been historical attempts to try and find out where on earth Antarctica is. Well, there's a book called When the Sky Fell by two authors, Rand Flemath and his wife Rose Flemath, and they come up with a lot of evidence to show that Antarctica is Atlantis, that Atlantis was buried under the Antarctic ice sheets because of a pole shift, and that Antarctica was actually in a much more temperate zone just before the end of the last ice age, and then there was a pole shift, and Antarctica was moved down there with an earth crustal displacement.
Right.
And so the ice sheets then began to form over West Antarctica in particular. But East Antarctica has been under ice sheets for a lot longer than West Antarctica.
I wanted to ask you about, are you familiar with Linda Moulton Howe's Spartan Antarctica series?
Very familiar with that. Yes, I just put out an article yesterday talking about the third in the series of interviews.
Awesome. Well, listen, we're going to take a really quick break here and talk about Contact in the Desert for a second. And, of course, Dr. Michael Salla will be there. And we'll come right back. After the break, we'll pick up and we'll talk about the secret space program that Dr. Salla has been following for a long time here.
And we're going to listen to from one of our friends over at
Brother George.
Yeah, Brother George at Coast to Coast AM, and he's going to also be at Contact in the Desert. We hope you join us May 31st through June 3rd. So we'll be right back, and more to talk to with Dr. Michael Salla. Here we go.
Join me, George Norrie, in Indian Wells, California, for the 7th Annual Contact in the Desert UFO Conference, May 31st to June 3rd. Contact in the Desert is an epic weekend of adventure filled with exciting explorations into ancient aliens, human origins, crop circles, UFO sightings, disclosure, and the newest evidence of ongoing contact. This amazing weekend offers over 50 lectures, 40 workshops, 8 exciting panels, special events, and a luncheon that I'm hosting. Contact in the Desert also features leading experts including Giorgio Tsoukalos, David Wilcock, Linda Moulton Howe, Michael Tellinger, Eric von Daniken, Doc Wallach, and many more important researchers and scientists in the field. Contact in the Desert is your place for inside information. Join us at thecontactinthedesert.com to get your tickets today. It's time to make contact. That's contactinthedesert.com. Don't miss it. Contactinthedesert.com.
All right, we're back. This is Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet with Captain Ron. We have Dr. Michael Salla, who's going to be a presenter at Contact in the Desert. We hope you come and join us. His website, exopolitics.org. Please go visit that. But Dr. Salla, we want to move on to another subject that I know our audience is really interested in, is the secret space program. And you believe it's been going on since the 1940s. And some of us, 1940, you can't even kind of fathom even going into space because we didn't even touch the moon until quote, quote, 69.
If we did.
If we did. And then the race, most of the race was, 50s and 60s. So can you kind of give us the rundown of the space program and how did it get started in the 40s? I mean, it's hard to imagine that we can even travel up to the space at that time.
Well, in the 1940s, I mean, there was a lot of effort to try and understand the principles behind flying saucer technologies, because the Navy and the Army were both had intelligence operations in place to find out as much as they could about how the Germans were developing their flying saucer fleets, how the extraterrestrials were helping the Germans, and what kind of extraterrestrial craft existed. And so the Navy and the Army and the Air Force, as it emerged in 1947, all had their own distinct efforts to try and understand these technologies. And they used companies such as the Douglas Aircraft Company in particular to set up think tanks to try and understand these technologies. So Douglas Aircraft Company in 1945 set up an entity called the RAND Project. And by 1948, it separated from the Douglas Aircraft Company to form the RAND Corporation, which continues to exist today, which from the very beginning was always a think tank to try and understand extraterrestrial technologies and how these can be reverse engineered and what the policy priorities ought to be. But the Navy worked with Douglas Aircraft Company to try and develop some of these anti-gravity technologies. And so this is where people like William Tompkins come into this picture, because they actually worked at Douglas Aircraft Company. And Tompkins was actually part of this think tank within Douglas that was actually coming up with designs for the future space battle groups that the Navy wanted to develop.
Go ahead. I guess I was going to ask you if do you think we've already got this? How far along do you think we've come, I guess is what I'm asking, in the secret space program? Do you think we've had manned missions to, for example, Mars? Or do you think that there's structures already on the moon that we've built? What are your thoughts on where we're at? How far?
I think as far as we are concerned, in talking about the United States, okay. So
I guess Earthlings, really, I guess.
Well, because the Germans were doing this in the 40s and 50s. They had already bases on the moon and then on Mars as well. So the Germans were the first to actually set foot.
That is a bold statement. You think that in the 1940s the Germans had bases on the moon?
That's right, yeah.
Wow.
Which is amazing. But if you look at their Hannibal 3 craft, it could go over 40,000 kilometers per hour, which is the escape velocity for the planet. So they had these craft that had these anti-gravity technologies that could travel at those kind of speeds with energy sources that were very, very different to kind of rocket propulsion systems. So even in the 40s and 50s, the Germans were establishing bases on the moon, on Mars, using anti-gravity technologies, and the Navy and the Air Force were monitoring all of this. They knew what the Germans were doing, which is why they struck deals with the Germans in the 50s to try and basically collaborate and get as much of these technologies. So, throughout the 50s and 60s, the US military is playing catch up to everything the Germans had done previously in the 40s and 50s.
Hold on, I'm going to go back to Tony's point from earlier. If they had the ability to go to the moon and build bases and go to other planetary systems, why would they have not just destroyed us? Because that technology alone would be so much. You're talking about this rocket speed to get out of the atmosphere and escape Earth and all this. Why wouldn't they have crushed us in the war?
Well, because you look at the end of the Second World War, the US and the British were sending bomber fleets of like over 1,000 planes, and these armies, and the tanks that the Russians were sending in, that the Americans and the British were sending in. That overwhelmed the Germans, and because, as far as I understand it, the Germans were pretty late in being able to deploy some of these advanced technologies. So, for example, the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter, now, they successfully deployed that at the end of the Second World War, but there were too few of them that they were able to deploy. They were just simply overwhelmed. And similarly for the Hannibal craft that were being used to both shoot down some of these bomber fleets or the tank formations that were pouring into Germany, there were too few of them. So the Germans just simply ran out of time. But by 1947, which is when Operation High Jump occurred, the Germans had an extra 2 years to successfully weaponize their flying saucer fleets. So they were ready for Operation High Jump, which is why they were able to survive into the 50s and 60s and become such a powerful global force behind the scenes.
So after the war, if you're saying in the 50s and 60s, how did the United States not just take that technology and take the bases and all, and I mean, because we did move very quickly from...
That's hard to reconcile.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine we just didn't go in and Russia and the U.S. going, okay, thank you for developing this. This is ours now. We'll take over from here. And like I said, even though we did advance from the 40s till the 60s of going...
And we got all
space,
those scientists.
So how did we not just take that over and having the 50s and 60s of the Germans still holding on to that?
Well, that was the goal. I think that's exactly what the US military intelligence community planned to do. But they were outsmarted because the Germans planned to do the reverse. They planned to take over the military-industrial complex, and they succeeded because what the Germans had a trump card, which was that they had thousands of German scientists who were the ones that were playing the role of the intermediary in understanding these advanced technologies, put into senior positions throughout the US military-industrial complex. And so, for example, you have people like Wernher von Braun, Kurt de Bus, and others that actually ran NASA in the 1960s and into the 1970s. And so you had, for example, the Marshall Flight Center, which ran the entire Apollo planet, the entire Apollo program was run from the Marshall Space Flight Center and from the Kennedy Space Center, and both were run and controlled by the Germans. Von Braun, de Bus, and other Germans ran these programs, and they were basically using the Apollo program to siphon off a lot of resources and manpower to Antarctica to help the German space program. So while the Apollo program got Americans to the moon, the Apollo program got the Germans to Europa, Saturn, and other space and other solar systems. So this is going to be one of the big revelations. And in my newest book, it's going to come out next month. It's going to be called the U.S. Air Force Secret Space Program: Shifting Extraterrestrial Alliances and Space Force. It basically tracks all of this. It shows how the Germans outwitted the Americans and used the Apollo program as a front for basically siphoning off all of the resources and manpower that the American military-industrial complex could give to the Germans, and in return gave the American space program rockets, and that was it. So the Germans were using anti-gravity technologies and helping the Americans develop rocket technologies to get to the moon. It was really a great deal for the Germans, and the Americans realized that they'd been really screwed.
It kind of reminds me of one of those movies where they're in battle and then the other side gives up just to infiltrate the people that they thought defeated them. So the victors actually in turn just allowed their enemy to come in to their homes and their businesses, and so that's what it kind of reminds me of. So is that kind of true?
Oh, definitely, because you have to really ask yourself, why is it that the Marshall Flight Center, which was set up to basically run the Apollo program, America's premier space program, civilian space program, where you had billions of dollars pouring in to fund this effort to go to the moon, why was that run by Germans, former Nazi officers? You look at Marshall Flight Center, it was run by the Germans, and actually Bill Tompkins says that he actually went to Marshall Space Flight Center to help to deliver a proposal for the Douglas Aircraft Company to design the Kennedy Space Center. And he said he was given the go-ahead by the Germans, by Kurt de Bruce, who was there. But the interesting thing was that Tompkins says that as he was driving up to the Marshall Flight Center to their headquarters, he saw this big flag. And guess what was on that flag? You guessed it. It was the Stars and Stripes with a swastika.
Wow.
Wow.
I would have never said that that's what's going on. Do you think that the Space Force has come out of this program, or do you think it's on a completely separate trajectory?
I think Space Force is Trump's effort, the Trump administration's effort, along with the support of the Air Force, to basically bring under the one rubric, under the one umbrella, all of these different space programs that have been run by different corporate entities that are building the craft for these different programs, whether it's the Germans in Antarctica, whether it's an interplanetary corporate entity that's flying craft out of bases in South America, whether it's the Europeans, whether it's the Australians. You know, all of these different corporations are out there performing all of these different kind of manufacturing projects to develop the components for these craft for space operations. So what I think Trump is trying to do with the Air Force is to put all of these different projects along with the different kind of special access programs within the US military industrial complex all under the one hat so that the Air Force can run the show. Because the Air Force realized in 2016, 2017, that they'd been lied to, that they weren't the tip of the spear, but that they were in fact like a planetary coast guard, and they were angry when they realized this, because the Air Force guys thought that all of these rocket technologies and the kind of like anti-gravity technologies that they've been given in the 70s and 80s were cutting edge technologies, but they realized too late that these in fact were kind of like redundant technologies of little use to the Germans in Antarctica or to entities like the Navy, so that the Air Force realized that they were way behind the eight ball. So they needed to catch up quickly. So I think Space Force is the effort by the Air Force to try to catch up by putting everything under the one house and eventually disclosing all of this advanced technology to the American public, so that this gets kind of white-walled, and so these Air Force programs get funded from Congress rather than the CIA, because the CIA has a black budget which is being used to fund all of these secret space programs. But it comes at a price, because if you work with the CIA, you've got to maintain secrecy, and they kind of infiltrate and they do things. And
so they're bringing part of it above board so they can get more funding above board.
That's right, because they realize that if you rely on these illicit funding sources, you're controlled by entities like the CIA and the deep state. But if you go above board, white-walled it, reveal what you're doing to the American public and the rest of the world, then Congress will say, yeah, sure, we'll fund you $100 billion for a fleet of anti-gravity craft that can get to Mars or can get to the asteroid belt, or we'll fund that. Sure, we'll give you $100 billion, and I'll write the checks. And so, and the Air Force now realizes that that's going to be a much better way for them to maintain control. So the Air Force has agreed to Space Force, and right now you actually have. As of today, you actually have a 4-star general appearing before Congress saying why Space Force is such a good idea, because it's going to aggregate all of these different sources, all of these different programs out there dealing with space, and aggregate it all onto the one entity, and why this is a good idea for the US Air Force, because it'll be a 6th branch of the US military, but it'll be under the Air Force. It'll be run by the Air Force administratively. But there'll be an Air Force 4-star general in charge of it.
I want to ask you, when we were kids, it was all about the space shuttle, and we were all excited, and it was pretty much, the future of the space program and NASA. And then after the disasters, you know, Challenger and what's the other one? I can't remember, but Discovery, it kind of fizzled out, and then they discontinued. But now there's a lot of private companies, you know, starting their own space exploration. So how does that work together? Because I would have never thought a private company would put that much money, because we used to spend billions and billions and billions on space program, where these companies aren't spending that much, and now they're going into space. Is this kind of the deflection, or do you feel like there is some validity on bringing some light to the space program and even the secret space program?
Well, I think that they cancelled the shuttle program in 2013, as I recall. Right. And Columbia was the second one that crashed.
Columbia. We just had him on. What are we thinking?
Yeah, I know, right?
We had Alan Steinfeld, or Alan, from the,
So I think that they did that. They cancelled the shuttle program, even though they had many more years life in it. They did it because they wanted to set the foundations for disclosing the truth of these anti-gravity craft that the Air Force has in its possession, that can fly to the moon, can fly to Mars, and into deep space now. Let alone what the Navy is doing out there. And so they wanted to cancel the shuttle program because they wanted a few years to pass by so that people would forget that for many years that a lot of taxpayer money was going into funding the space shuttle, when you had all of these fleets of anti-gravity craft that could fly to the moon and Mars at a fraction of the cost. People would have been very, very angry. So they cancelled the program, allowed a number of years to fly by, and now they're letting companies like SpaceX develop more innovative rocket technologies to do it better, so that when they do roll out, that hey, by the way, the Air Force has these anti-gravity craft that are used in these highly classified fleets that we've been sending up to the moon and Mars, that now we have these and we're going to share this technology with the civilian industry, that rather than people being angry, they're going to be elated that, that this was something that can now be released to the general public, and you can actually have the Boeing aircraft company develop anti-gravity space liners. Because actually Boeing, I know, has repeatedly requested permission to have these anti-gravity technologies declassified so that they can develop a civilian space industry. So once you actually have the Air Force revealing the existence of its anti-gravity craft, you'll have Boeing and other aircraft companies being able to develop civilian anti-gravity craft for mass transit. So you can fly from New York to Hawaii in less than an hour.
Wow.
You can fly to the moon and do tourist trips. So it'll revolutionize the aerospace industry. So I think that's the plan. So it'll bring a lot of hope, and and it'll reinvigorate the kind of aerospace industry in the United States and help the US economy move forward quickly, which is what really attracts Trump to all of this.
Hey, Doc, you already mentioned Corey Goode. There's also a couple of these other guys. Emery Smith is one, and there's been a few of these guys lately that have whistleblown about these events. What is your take on them? Obviously, you think Corey Goode's legitimate. Do you think Emery Smith and some of these other whistleblowers are real? Do you think what they're saying is legitimate?
Right, yeah. Corey Goode, Bill Tompkins, I think is genuine. Emery Smith is genuine. I've looked at his DD-214, and let me look at some of his documentation showing that he actually did serve in the U.S. Air Force in the in the early 90s, and that he did work at Kirtland Air Force Base in these kind of medical facilities.
Well, that's easy to verify, but it's harder to verify that he teleported to Mars, which he thinks he did. So, I mean, those things are harder to prove. Do you think that those claims that he's making are plausible?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's the same thing we find with many of these whistleblowers, that sometimes you can confirm the background, but that doesn't prove their claims. I mean, you can confirm that that Smith worked for the Air Force and was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base. You can prove that Bill Tompkins worked at Douglas Aircraft Company and also worked at Lockheed and some other companies. You can confirm the background for many of these whistleblowers, but that doesn't substantiate their claims. But it does makes it much more plausible, as opposed to someone just coming forward and making these claims. Clearly, the fact that Emery Smith says that he worked at Kirtland Air Force Base at this secure facility, dissecting extraterrestrial entities, having access to these different anti-gravity spacecraft, and walk through stargates to other worlds. That is made more plausible when he supplies documentation showing that he was stationed at Kirtland in the 90s, and also some of his patents. He's supplied patents that show that he was at the cutting edge of some medical technology that was of interest to NASA. So he worked on plasma-rich planets that he was saying could actually help astronauts recover very quickly from injuries. That was of interest to the space program, to NASA. And so he was actually going to go on a NASA mission, that he has made that claim. And sure enough, he did work with a company that was working with NASA at the time. So these background things do help substantiate his story. But as you say, it doesn't prove his story, but it does help substantiate key elements of it.
Also, I want to ask you about one more thing. You mentioned those guys. What about QAnon or Q or whatever? Do you think that that's a legitimate thing too? I mean, a lot of us follow him, and sometimes he's what he says does happen.
Yeah, no, I think QAnon is the real deal. I first became interested in him in November of 2017. Corey Good said that the information that QAnon was releasing matched the information he was getting from some of his insiders, and I've met some of them. I've met some of his insiders, and I can't give too many details, but one of them was a general. So I did meet a general that actually was advising Corey Good. I did meet him, and I've done my due diligence on this general, and yet confirmed that he is a general for a NATO country. And so Corey was saying that this person was actually giving information that was identical to what QAnon was releasing. So I became very interested in QAnon from November 2017, and then more things that QAnon, as time rolled out, more and more things that QAnon was saying matched. One of the things that really got me interested was on January 7 of 2018, QAnon said that beware of an upcoming DEFCON 1 situation that would be that was a false flag event. And sure
that was
enough,
our next question. That's perfect.
Yeah, and sure enough, 6 days later, on January 13, exactly, you have it on the screen there, that ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. This is not a drill. So that happened. So QAnon predicted this 6 days before it happened. So, and QAnon says, future proves past. So this was one of those examples of future proving past. And more recently, you have had documentation being released showing that Jeff Sessions in November of 2017 did appoint John Hoovers to begin investigations of deep state figures that were performing all of these crimes that the House Intelligence and House Judiciary Committees were reporting. So, and you look at in November of 2017, QAnon again did point to Sessions actually appointing and starting an investigation into the deep state where sealed indictments could be made against deep state people. So then later on, you actually have documentation being released showing that November 2017 was when QAnon, so it was when Sessions appointed John Hoover to begin investigations and convene grand juries that could issue sealed indictments. So again, this is one of those future-proof past incidents. And so there are many other incidents that, to my mind, convince me that QAnon is the real deal and is working with very high-level people within the resistance, within the alliance. There's a multinational alliance that is working with QAnon. So this is not just US military intelligence. This is also the intelligence community of other countries, such as those in NATO, that are helping this information get forward. And I know this for a fact because, as I mentioned, I did meet with one of these NATO officials, or former NATO officials, who confirmed Corey Goode's information.
Well, the clock's ticking here. We're running out of time. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think about, what should we watch for that'll be coming next out of Antarctica? I mean, there's been those guys going down there. Do you think there'll be, what's the next revelation coming out of Antarctica, do you think?
Well, just keep watching the revelations about all of these huge caverns being discovered in Antarctica, all of the ice sheets collapsing and melting, because those are going to be indications that the speed of the melt-off of West Antarctica is much more rapid than anything that any major mainstream scientist has said. They're predicting that West Antarctica is going to melt off within 100 years by the end of the century. I believe firmly, based on the information that I've been receiving, it's going to happen within the next 10 years. So just keep a lookout for all of these melt-offs, all of these huge caverns. Like the latest is the Thwaites Cavern in West, so the Thwaites Glacier in West Antarctica. This huge underground cavern they've found under the Thwaites Glacier, and they're saying that with this, the rapid melt-off of the Thwaites Glacier is much faster than anything they predicted. So just keep an eye on this, because I think that as West Antarctica melts off, you're gonna make many discoveries of things that were buried there. I think that this is where we're going to make the discovery that Atlantis was real, that just as Troy was discovered in the early 19th century, proving Homer was correct, you're going to find these ruins being discovered in West Antarctica, proving that Plato was right, Atlantis was real, it was an advanced civilization, and it's there buried under the Antarctic ice sheets.
I hope they show the public some of this stuff if they find it. I
hope so, too.
I hope so.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but we want to make sure everybody goes to Contact in the Desert May 31st through June 3rd. And again, if you can't make it, we hope you can. Please just keep tuning in to Truth Be Told. We're going to be interviewing majority of the presenters all the way up till May 31st. And even live from there, we're going to be interviewing. But I know Dr. Salla is going to be doing a lecture and a workshop and even a Monday intensive. And so we hope you guys can get your tickets now, because those sell out fast, and it's in Indian Wells, Indian Wells,
California.
California. And so get your tickets now, because I know these tickets go fast. So, but as always, thank you, Dr. Salla, for being on Truth Be Told. You're always great.
Well, thank you, Tony and Captain Ron. Appreciate it.
We'll see you in a few weeks. It's coming up about 6-7 weeks away.
I know. I can't believe it. And we're excited to see you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Aloha.
All right, before we get out of here, please, would you go in the description of this actual video and majority of the videos going forward, we need your help. We need you to fill out a survey. We kind of just want to get to know who you are. We want to find out who's listening to us and all your support. And I know you guys have been great, and we love having you join us every week with us. And I know Pursuing X in a chat room, they put a survey in there also. So if you could fill that out for us, we'd really appreciate you doing that. Thank you guys for tuning in every week. This is Tony Sweet and Captain Ron, and we want to see you next time on Truth Be Told. Bye-bye.